Good morning. Can y'all hear me? Yeah. Y'all ready? Bill, you ready? So I'm going to do, we're in Zechariah. I'm going to do chapters 9 through 11 today. Actually, chapters 9 through 14 contains two undated oracles. The two oracles, from the Hebrew Masa is also translated burdens. The land of Harak is generally thought to have been located in the northern part of Lebanon. It is only mentioned here where it is grouped with Damascus, Hamath, Tyre, and Sidon. And so you can find that information in Amos, as you see on the slide up there. And so Sidon is, as you can see, is north of Tyre, where the red pin is at. So, no, next. There we go. Tyre defended itself multiple times. The city was finally built offshore. That is the reason why they were wise, is because they moved offshore. And you can see when Alexander conquered Tyre, he built a land mass, like a bridge across. That is how he conquered them. While Zechariah 9:3 itself doesn't explicitly mention Satan behind a king, the concept of a powerful ruler being influenced or controlled by evil forces is often interpreted through the lens of Zechariah chapter 3, where Satan is depicted as an accuser standing against Joshua, the high priest. Tyre recovered from Nebuchadnezzar to reinforce their island stronghold and store their silver and gold on the island city. Heaped up in Hebrew is Wadisbar. Is also used to describe how the dead, putrid frogs were piled up in Egypt in Exodus chapter 8 and 14. They withstood a 5-year siege from Assyria. Tyre did. Nebuchadnezzar fought against them for 13 years and defeated the mainland city, but could not reach the island city. Alexander destroyed Tyre on the island by building a causeway using debris of the destroyed mainland city left by Nebuchadnezzar's siege. And you can see today they left that small bridge and a causeway, and it became a peninsula. This is the modern Tyre. So the Philistine cities would see the fate of Tyre and fear. Alexander was on his way to Egypt. The siege of Gaza occurred when Alexander used the same siege engines he had built at Tyre. With the defeat of Gaza and the Philistine cities, Alexander controlled the Mediterranean coast. These Philistine cities would be repopulated with people from different countries. The Philistines would be eliminated to such an extent by Alexander that the land of the Philistines would be occupied by people from other nations moving in. So you can see in this picture that the four cities of the Philistines here, as he was heading down to Egypt. Alexander approached Jerusalem, but did not attack or destroy it. Alexander worshipped in the Jerusalem temple as a Gentile worshiper of God. Josephus reports that Alexander had a dream, met with the priests, worshipped in the temple, and decided to spare Jerusalem. The text says, "No oppressor shall again march over them." This could refer to a temporary state until the rise of the Seleucid Empire in Syria, or this could refer to the ultimate fulfillment at the coming kingdom, but Alexander provides a temporary type of this peace. So in 9:9 describes the character of the king, coming king, and 9:10 presents the king's accomplishments when he comes. The first coming of Christ is 9:9, and the second coming of Christ is in 9:10. The whole church age occurs between Zechariah 9:9 and 9:10. This is the same thing that occurs between Isaiah 9:6 and 9:7. The Gospels clearly identify Jesus as fulfilling Zechariah 9:9. The Gospels never claim Jesus fulfilled 9:10 during his earthly ministry. The New Testament is based in the anticipation and hope that Jesus will fulfill Zechariah 9:10. So now we move to 9 through 17. In verse 9, the Messiah is righteous or just, not oppressive, lawless, or showing favoritism, having salvation, not captivity, destruction, or death, humble, not proud, boastful, or rebellious. A donkey is identified as a colt, the foal of a donkey, which identifies this animal as a purebred and not a mule, a hybrid of a male donkey and a horse, were mounts rode by royalty. See Judges 5:10, 10:4, and 12:14. In the first century, many Jew sects, including the Qumran community, anticipated two messiahs. The main difference here is it is a donkey and not a horse. Fulfillment was in Matthew 21:1 through 6 and John 12 through 16. So if you come in on a donkey, if you're a king and you're coming in on a donkey, you're coming in peace. But if you come in on a horse in the ancient days, in the Far East, you're coming in as war. Verse 10, before the Messiah can reign in peace on earth, all enemies will need to be defeated. See Psalms 110. The mention of Ephraim and Jerusalem gives the impression this is more than the city and more than the southern Judah. But the deliverance comes to both northern Israel, Ephraim, and southern Judah, Jerusalem, as a land, and the 12 tribes are restored. Verse 11, who is you? Which covenant? What prisoners are set free? What is the waterless pit? So if we did that, everyone in sin, through the blood covenant, set free from hell. Verse 12, the question is, return to where? What stronghold? So if you look at Psalms 18:2, 31:3, 71:3, 91:2, 144:2, and Jeremiah 16:19, and Nahum 1:7. And then verse 12 mentions double portion. See Isaiah 42, 51:19, 61:7. So now we have Greece coming in. Verse 13, the verse was partially fulfilled with the conflict between the Maccabees, the sons of Zion, and the Greek Seleucids in Syria, sons of Greece. But this is progressively working towards the ultimate conflict and complete fulfillment at the end. Verse 14, the battle begins. No one but the Lord does the work, similar to Exodus 19, 16 through 19. And we see this in 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 and 17, 2 Thessalonians 1, 7 and 8, 1 Corinthians 15, verses 51 and 52, Matthew 24, 27, 30 through 31, and Acts 1, 9 and 11. So now we go to 15, identifies the divine warrior and the results. Lord of hosts in Hebrew has a sense of army, war, or warfare. Refers to the military troops organized for war. If you remember in Matthew 26:53, he mentions 12 legions, which is 72,000 angels. That's just the tip of a spear, if you think about it. Small amount for the Lord of hosts. So 14 starts the battle. 15 defends Judah and Ephraim and the sons of Zion. 16, God will save them. All this together clearly means the people of God are set apart for a purpose or consecrated and may have direct connections to the royalty and priesthood of the King, the Messiah, the Lord. Go to verse 17. Opening words in Hebrew means this is another reason God saves his people. The verse, however, looks beyond saving people in verse 16 to the days and years that follow. The key to understanding this verse may be to return to Isaiah 62. They are very similar. So now we go to chapter 10. So Zechariah contrasts asking God for rain. God promises to shower spiritually. And so you contrast asking idols for guidance. So terrapins were images that represented deceased ancestors. Diviners meaning to practice divination, witchcraft, making sons and daughters pass through the fire. Because the people and their leaders sought terrapin and diviners, they were lost with no truth. So these are pictures of what terrapins used to look like. In verse 4, cornerstone is a cut stone that is used to ensure the spiritual stability of a temple or palace, establish the structural integrity of a physical building, secure the correct location, orientation of the building, since this is the first stone laid, anchor the structure as the foundation stone. If you look at verse 5, riders on horses, one of the major innovations of the Persian military was the introduction of the cavalry, or riders on horses, to outmaneuver foot soldiers. Verse 8, we look at John 10:27. Jesus is the shepherd that says, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me." Verse 11, they is referring to Ephraim, and he is God. Why so many prophecies about Israel's return? Prophecies were given in time periods so that the people would know of God's promise. Different information is given. So if we look at Zephaniah 3, 8 through 17, king in the last days. Hosea 3, 4 through 5, regathered with new heart. Jeremiah 32, 37 through 39, God will bring Israel back. Isaiah 11, 1 through 8 and 11 through 16, God will dwell with them. Zechariah 8, 7 and 8, 14 through 16, Israel will have a king. Zechariah 2, 5 through 11, Ezekiel 20, 34, and Isaiah 66, 8, Israel will be a nation again. So in Isaiah 43, 8, Israel has spiritual eyes and ears. In Amos 9, 11 through 15, the cities will be rebuilt. Zechariah 1, 16 and 17, Israel will be prosperous. Ezekiel 36, 25 through 26, and Zechariah 10, Israel will have a new heart and spirit. So as I mentioned, the Maccabean revolt was in 1715 to 163 BC, and the Lord of hosts equals the Lord of armies. So if you see 2 Samuel 7, 14 through 17, Deuteronomy 30, 1 through 10, Exodus 24, 8, and Genesis 15, 18 through 21. So now, as we know, Jesus is rejected. So basically, Zechariah 11 is a poem about forest fires. The forest fires start in Lebanon. The forest fires move down to Bashan. The forest fires sweep down the Jordan Valley. The picture of the destruction of Israel and the religious leaders and youth are ruined. So in verse 4, Zechariah plays a role as if in a play. He is the only actor. He plays the role of a shepherd. He plays the role of the Messiah, the flock of Israel. See Jeremiah 23, 3 and Ezekiel 34, 6. So Zechariah 11, 4 through 6 verse 5 is a difficult verse to understand. Who buys Israel? Romans conquered nations and then sold the people as slaves. Romans apparently gave credit to God for their wealth. Jewish leaders did not care. Verse 6, therefore God has no pity on them. See, Zechariah 9:8, God protected Israel against the Grecian army. Zechariah was written in 470 BC. Greece invaded in 331 BC. The Roman army invaded in 146 BC. Verse 7 talks about two staffs. Two staffs represent the shepherd's symbolic tools, named favor and union, signifying God's kindness and the unity of the flock, respectively. Zechariah takes on the role of the shepherd, tending to a flock destined to slaughter. but with these staffs representing hope for God's favor and unity despite the dire situation. The key point about the two staffs, favor, represents God's grace, kindness, and blessing, and union represents unity, connection, and the bond between the people. So, as we can see, it was a poem about fires. Again, as I said, it goes down. The poem illustrates language for the invading Roman army into Israel, pictures the defeat of Jerusalem. Zechariah plays the role of the Messiah, the flock of Israel. The Romans would sell Jews as slaves. The Jewish leaders didn't care. God would not protect Israel this time. So we have the two staffs, kindness or favor, and oneness and union. Most difficult verse in chapter 11 is verse 8. Who is the shepherd? The answer is in Jeremiah 2:8. Religious leaders rejected Christ, Matthew 12:27-32. Christ rejected the religious leaders, Matthew 13:13-15, John 5:18, 7:11-13, 19 and 25, and then John 8:22, 37, 10:10, 11:53, and 19-22. The Messiah stopped shepherding Israel. See Luke 19:41-44. The first staff of favor is broken in verse 10. The covenant was of restraint. The covenant of restraint was broken, and the king and kingdoms delayed. The remnant would understand in verse 11. Wages of Messiah in Exodus 21:32. The wages thrown away are in Matthew 26:14-16, chapter 27:3-10, Luke 22:1-6, and Acts 1:16-19. The second staff is broken in verse 14. Symbolic of Jews would return on one another. Persecuted Christian Jews turned against one another with the Roman army besieged Jerusalem. Again, verse 8, the most difficult verse in the chapter. Who are the shepherds? The religious leaders rejected Christ. We know that. Christ rejected the religious leaders. Messiah, okay, I think I've repeated my slides here. Away. So now we're in 11:15-17. Zechariah the prophet plays the role of an antichrist in verse 15. What is the foolish shepherd's equipment? Characteristic of foolish shepherds is in Ezekiel 34:2-8, Lamentations 2:14, Hosea 4:5-9, and Malachi 2:6-9. The characteristics of a good shepherd is in Ezekiel 34:11-15, 23 and 24, John 10:10 and 11, and John 21:15-17. The shepherd, foolish, verse 15, raised up in Israel, verse 16, and false in verse 17. Appears that the Antichrist will live in Israel initially. Daniel 11:36 suggests he abandons Jehovah. Verse 17 suggests that he leaves Israel. All the passages suggest that he will be a leader of some type. The worthless shepherd, the Hebrew word Elel is translated as worthless and refers to a leader who is of no value to God or others. The sword in verse 17 symbolizes divine judgment and retribution. In biblical times, the arm represented strength and power, while the right eye symbolized insight and vision. The false shepherd, the verse is a commentary on the false shepherd of Israel from the day of the fanatical general at Masada to the present. The rejection of Jesus, the verse is a fulfillment of Isaiah's rejection of Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And I'm done, fast. I went faster. Yeah. I didn't think it would go this fast. So we know verse 11, or chapters 9 through 11 talks about the first coming of Christ, who is coming in salvation and peace. And so the second one, he will come in war. We know in Revelations that Jesus' return will be on a horse, on a white horse, as it talks about in Zechariah. Wade, you got anything you want to add? Well, I studied the Jewish side too, because back then, before Christ came, they believed, they read Zechariah, and they believed, well, if we're good enough, we'll get the one coming in on a horse, and he'll conquer. But if we're not good enough, he'll come in on a donkey. And what was interesting is he came into Jerusalem on a donkey, and they were like, no, this is not what we want. We don't want you to come in peace. And so they rejected him. That's the reason. Really, we want control. We don't want to lose control, but we want you to come in and conquer the Romans. But he didn't. Came in peace. And they rejected that. They didn't want that. Yes. Yes. Well, it was during. Right. Okay. The people knew. The leaders did not want him. They rejected him. The people knew this is our king. He's coming. Like it says in Zechariah. True. But, okay, you ever been in a crowd where someone starts yelling, fight, fight, or fire? You stir up a crowd. And so the leaders are in the crowd, and they're saying these things, and so the rest of the crowd is going to follow. They're following. Yes. Right. That's true. Mm-hmm. Chapter 2. Yeah. Yep. And mm-hmm. Well, and you were saying chapter 2, but it repeats again in chapter 10, verse 2. Idols utter deceit. And, oh, I thought you said chapter 2. Yeah. 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 But they relate false dreams. So it's the deceiver. Yeah. Yeah. By the false deceiver, the accuser, as we call it. And God's anger burned against them. Yep. Anybody else got anything? Yep, I agree. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Kind of. Mm-hmm. Right. But they still, most Jews still reject Jesus as the Messiah to this day. Until his second coming, what I understand, until his second coming, they will reject him. DNA-wise, I'm 25% Jewish. Yeah, right. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Well, I would argue with that, but that's fine. The only way you could the only way you could become an Israelite to go back to Israel right now is if you had 1/8. Mm-hmm. We all won, yes. David, can you lead us in a prayer? Lead us in a prayer, please.